As with anyone with a diverse audience, there are things that I believe that not everyone in the audience believes. And one of the big ones of those here is that there's no reason to go where you're treated best because Klaus Schwab and his goons are coming to get you, and there's absolutely nowhere to go, and you should just stop and defend Western civilization. And while I have nothing against Western civilization in general, I do believe that go where you're treated best is the best way to preserve your wealth, preserve your freedom. And because I am a lifelong entrepreneur, I don't want to be a defeatist and just sit around saying, hey, there's absolutely no option. Because even if the world was coming to an end and there were going to be absolutely no options, like, wouldn't you want to know you tried everything you can? Yeah, most people who say they're going to go out and fight in the streets are not going to do it, and I think it's probably a lot higher percentage chance that you will survive by going to the place that gives you that best chance. And so if it's your first time here, I'm Andrew Henderson, founder of Nomad Capitalist. We are a boutique consulting firm that helps 7- and 8-figure entrepreneurs and investors legally go where you're treated best, and that means reducing your taxes, increasing your freedom, going with the flow of where the world is going, investing accordingly, and basically skating where the puck is going. And so even though our business does that, I've personally done it, accumulating multiple citizenships, residence permits around the world, bank accounts, investments, all over the place. And so I eat my own dog food, as they say. But I wanted to share this comment from someone who I believe doesn't think she should go where she's treated best. Her name is Catherine, and she says, I can appreciate wanting to live where we're most appreciated, where our money is most appreciated. But if everyone in the West does this, who is left behind to fight the communist takeover of Western civilization? And so we no doubt talk about how in the West, not every single country in the West, but the big, what we call legacy brand countries, the ones that are punching below their weight, the ones that are thriving off of their old reputation, which doesn't really exist in a competitive society anymore. They are indeed raising your taxes. They're doing all kinds of stuff to get more money out of you, and they're pitting people against each other. And if you're a successful person, you're the one they're pitting everyone against. However, at a certain point, saying who's going to sit around and defend this civilization, which perhaps doesn't want to be defended at a certain point. Perhaps societies change, right? I mean, like, who's going to defend the Holy Roman Empire, right? I mean, maybe the society wants to change into what it's going to become, and maybe if it inevitably falls apart or falls in stature or becomes less relevant or becomes less financially successful or less free, maybe that's where it was destined to go. But the idea that, like, who's going to stand around and defend it, to me, is like asking, who's going to shop at Radio Shack? Like, if no one shops at Radio Shack, what's going to happen? Well, I'll tell you what's going to happen. They're going to go bankrupt, and Tai Lopez is going to buy them and put them online. That's what's going to happen. Who will shop at Radio Shack? Who cares? People go where they're treated best. Capital goes where it's treated best. It happens in business, and I don't understand when a society says, here's what we want, why you should stand and defend that. She says, all the other foreign cultures might, for a while, seem able to more easily prosper you. If I'm looking for anything, if I want to be treated in any way, I want to be prospered. But the truth is, they're being left alone at the moment while progressive Marxism marshals its weapons to take over the West. So the progressive Marxism marshals, they're taking a pass right now in Malaysia. All right, Malaysia, take a powder. But we'll be back. We're coming back. Okay, so just understand, according to Catherine, if you're going somewhere where you're treated well, where they don't tax you, where the taxes are low, it's only a temporary. They want to drag you in, so that one day the progressive Marxism marshals can come back and cut you off of the past. They're going to slit your wrists. That makes sense. Once that's accomplished, do you think the dear leaders of the enemy who have ruined the West won't return to Eastern or smaller countries, not yet fully communist, to hunt you down? And my answer to that is the life cycle of why maybe some countries, listen, I'm not rooting for anyone's destruction because, again, lifelong entrepreneur, how do you win and how do you become successful? With win-wins, right? So some other country becoming unsuccessful doesn't help me. I'm here calling balls and strikes. It's not because I'm so gleefully excited that countries are losing their freedoms or doing that. I'm simply trying to be the voice who says, all right, here's the report. Freest countries in the world. Yours is 37th. You don't like that, so you say I'm attacking your country, and then you think I'm on the side with Putin or something. I don't know Putin. And the reason that these countries will not all hunt me down is because in this life cycle, empires don't last forever, countries don't last forever. I could surmise that every generation, somebody needs to move. And if you want me to talk more about that, leave a comment below, because I have some thoughts on that in a greater scale. But you also have countries in that life cycle where they more recently were communist. And so if you look at, for example, the Index of Economic Freedom, I don't believe it's entirely accurate, but it gives you some things to think about. And the United States has dropped pretty much every year since I started reading it when I was like 13 years old. And now you have 4 countries that within my lifetime were communist that are beating the United States, and I think one that's tied with it. And so those countries would like to move in the right direction because they know what it looks like. If you go to places perhaps in Eastern Europe, if you go to certain places in Latin America, certain parts in Asia, anywhere that's emerging where they are moving in the right direction, remember, in business, and I think in this as well, what matters is direction more than speed. So countries that want to move in the right direction are doing the right things to escape the dear leaders of the enemy coming and ruining them, because they know what that's about. And they want their freedoms, they want their economic freedoms, they just want to live their life and be left alone. And so that's why it is less of a risk in some of these places, as opposed to, and I can't really call it the Paris Hilton of countries anymore, because isn't Paris Hilton like running a pretty brisk business now with her NFTs and selling Philippines real estate? But I used to call the U.S. the Paris Hilton of countries, because it's kind of like the money trickles down enough generations and people just kind of like, I don't know where it came from, but let's party. And you don't have that luxury in a country where your parents were sharing 1 can of tuna fish when you were a child because things were so bad, because the country was going through a transformation, because the Soviet Union fell apart, for example. You have a different perspective on life than someone who grew up in a country where everything was just kind of there, right? And where now that country is facing more headwinds. And so if you are decent at all, Catherine says, because she has stooped to the argument, and people like this have to stoop to the argument of, if you don't agree with her, and if you don't call her country the best in the world, you must be a meanie. But if you are at all decent and believe in freedom to prosper, the liberty to be unique, the corrupt elitist dear leaders will hunt you down. At the end of your life is having made lots of money, while at the end, you and your children suffer under global communism and deviant society so important to you. And right here, I think Catherine shows that if you are an entrepreneur, she doesn't understand you at all. Most people don't understand entrepreneurs, and by the way, if you're not going to be understood, which you're not in the Western world right now by and large, the next best thing is to just be left alone, right? I don't know that successful people will ever be fully understood by most people. But at least there are places where they just leave you alone. I don't look in someone else's pocket, as I've heard. And so if you're an entrepreneur, you do it to create value. And I've seen, by the way, the people who only care about making $2 million to go to the champagne room, doesn't usually last. Sometimes it doesn't even last a year or two, right? People who create value long term, who have ethics, who do things for other people, are the ones who are successful and make money. And so, yeah, the byproduct of doing all that is they get to make money. They then get to buy their freedom, they get to live comfortably, they get to contribute to causes, and they get to leave a legacy. And so, yeah, I think it's important because it's not just about making money. It's about everything that comes from the fruits of your labor. And that should be something that's respected, but it's not respected in the West. And I'm even seeing that some people who are on the right side, if we're using the left-right system that they use in the United States, even some folks on the right, oh, it's not all about money. No, it was never all about money. But that's what's happened, is anyone who has money has now been lumped into, you're just a greedy person. No, you're a person who created value. And so the corrupt, elitist dear leaders will hunt me down. Yeah, I'm not worried about that. I'm really not. And if you believe that Klaus Schwab is coming to take everything that you own, then I think you're spending too much time in the Western paradigm. You're spending too much time with a certain kind of people. And it's easier to sit around and say that. By the way, if you really believe that, you wouldn't just be sitting around waiting for it to happen. You would be doing absolutely everything. You would have residence in 20 different countries. You would have citizenship in as many places as you could afford to do so. You would be scouring your family tree to figure out, hold on, wait a second, if I've got an Italian, great grandmother, I'll at least have access to like 30 other countries I could live in. And maybe one of them Klaus won't get his mitts into. But you don't really believe it. It's a sort of kind of mental masturbation for some people about how, like, this guy's gonna come and take everything you own, and you're just gonna sit there and let it happen because you didn't want to move to Saudi Arabia or something, or you didn't want to move to Vanuatu, or you didn't want to have any options in your tool chest. And then you're going to sit and tell me, someone who has prepared, someone who has been living. I didn't have to wait until the summer of 2022 to take a vacation to Europe because I've been sitting at home for the last 2 years. I've been traveling for the last 2 years. I've been moving between my homes, and I've been living quite freely. I've not been suffering under global communism during this time because I've been continuing my very tax-friendly mobile lifestyle. Where I've been focused on creating more value. And how have we done that? We've helped more people than ever, save more money than ever, protect their families, and they've been willing to pay for that because they believe in what we're doing. That is the measure of value, is helping people. And it's in that I've been avoiding global communism. So go ahead, she says, and abandon your culture. Something, again, a shaming tactic. I do appreciate the permission. Leave this sinking ship, she says. And yes, it is a sinking ship. It is not fully submerged, and maybe it will never be fully submerged, but the ship in many Western countries is sinking. All the metrics are heading in the wrong direction. Freedom, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, personal freedom, citizenship rights. You have countries in the West introducing conscription again, dragging people into that. You have countries in the West that are doing things that you would say only a banana republic would do, and they're doing it. And so, yes, the ship is sinking. The numbers are bad. Is the United States or the UK or Australia ever going to be the most corrupt country or the least free country? No, absolutely not. It might be the most high-taxed country, but they're not going to be the absolute worst. They're not going to be throwing everybody in prison, although who has the highest prison population in the U.S.? It's the United States. In the world, it's the United States. And so the Western world is a sinking ship. That does not mean every country that's not in the West is also not sinking or is not doing things badly. But it means that plenty of other countries outside of the West, and a few in it, are moving in the right direction. They are improving things. They've realized they have to be competitive now that the world is opening up and the Chinese aren't driving bicycles around anymore. They actually have cars now, the same way you do. And so, yeah, abandon my culture. Some of us who grew up in a country never felt that we should have been there. And by the way, that's not everybody that we help. Plenty of people, they love their country, but they just say, hey, listen, for 10 million bucks, I'm out of here. I never understood it. And you know what? I'll bet it was people like Catherine. Catherine was the one when you were 13 years old. No, who are you? I'm not going out with you. Oh yeah, you're working on some business? Oh yeah, what are you, a geek? What are you, a nerd? Now Catherine needs to be relevant because Catherine's she's like one of those people who listens to talk radio and she still writes letters like WABC, 1 Penn Plaza. And so now she's going to be relevant. The culture of growing up with the Catherines of the world was like, you're starting a bit. No, that's good. I'm not going to, no. And so, yeah, abandoning that culture for other cultures that were like, oh yeah, a business guy. That's pretty cool. What, you're starting a business at 30, really? You're 29. You have a business? Wow. Ooh, I'm impressed. Yeah. What a hard culture to leave. And extend your false sense of freedom. Until the West is utterly demolished. Well, they're getting there. And at that point, there shall be nowhere else to flee because dear leaders always want every soul on earth to submit to them. Or maybe just people in Western countries are tired of going to work and they have every story for why it should be UBI and 4-day work week and don't call me at 401 and everything else. Maybe it's more just about people who have grown soft in certain cultures that forgot why their country became successful and are destined to fight against it more than it is some conspiracy theory of the dear leaders. Listen, I'm sure there are many people who think I'm a little conspiratorial with the tax, the freedoms, and they're going to cancel your passport. I'm not exactly I get it. But this is a little too much for me. The dear leaders are coming for every soul. It's like a Disney movie with a cauldron and they're jumping around behind the cauldron. My false sense of freedom is not false at all because I'm reminded of a show when I was a kid called Just Shoot Me. And there's a guy who's the secretary who's not very good with women. And he has the co-worker who's the photographer who's very good with women. And so the guy who's not good with women goes on a date with some model who comes into the fashion magazine they work at. And she screws him over. She basically, he takes her on a trip. He spends all of his life savings. And then she goes and gets with somebody else. And so he says, hey, you're good with women. You go out with her and you lure her in. And then you tell her, you screwed with my friend. That's not cool with me. And the false sense of freedom she talks about, to me, is reflected when the womanizer, the guy who's good with women, he lures her in, but he's so lured in that he can't say, you screwed my friend over, because she lures him in more than he lures her in. And then the friend says, what are you going to do? You're gonna date her for the rest of your life, get married, have children, get a white picket fence, and then yell sucker at her open casket. And I said to myself, if you're the guy in that relationship who enjoys yourself so much, you're going to do all these things, like, what's the point? What are you losing out on? If I have a false sense of freedom until one day Catherine comes to my grave and says, it was all false. Is freedom what Catherine defines it as? Is freedom some metric, or is it how you feel? And so if you feel more free, and I can tell you, in pretty much every country I've been to, with a few exceptions, I feel more free on a day-to-day basis than I did in the US. I feel a sense of relief not having to deal with the IRS, not because I never wanted to comply. I did comply. I always complied. I paid a lot. But I can tell you, having to fill out my every bank account in the world, yeah, it's a little bit unnerving. What if I make a mistake? What are they going to do to me? I feel a lot more free living outside of the United States. Is that a false sense of freedom? Not at all. And so if you believe that there's nowhere to go, I thought you guys were the fighters. I thought you guys were the ones who were going to fight to the death. I'm not in favor of that. I don't recommend that you do that. And I don't think that any of you are going to do that. You just like to talk about it because it gives you a sense of relevance. And I'm sorry, but I would rather focus on living a happy life. I would rather focus on living a peaceful life. I would rather try and move in that direction rather than sit around stewing in the misery of having to think something and think why I'm so much smarter than everybody else. It's not going to bring the happiness that people like Catherine are looking for. In the meantime, the rest of us are going to make more money, actually live with more freedom, and, sure, maybe my children will need to live a different lifestyle because the world will change again. That's what happens. The world changes. Things are constantly in flux. But to say that means you should just sit there and wait for your sinking ship to sink and just say, well, hey, what can you do about it? What you should do about it is constantly adapt to the times. The fact is the world is becoming less Western-centric, and that bothers a lot of people. Some people just because it's scary, change is scary. Some people for more nefarious reasons. Maybe they don't like the Indonesians, some of the nicest people in the world, by the way, but they don't like the fact that someone who doesn't look like them perhaps is going to have more economic relevance. And that's not all of it. But the reality is the world is going to be less Western-centric in your lifetime. Economies like India are going to become some of the largest in the world, and that's going to change how things work. Is that good or bad? It just is. And so you can prepare for it, you can diversify, you can be ready, and you can enjoy the benefits, constantly adapting as you go, or you can sit at home and talk about the dear leaders taking your soul.